So Julia Kim joined the Local Government Commission in March of 2015 and serves as the Director of Climate and Energy Programs. She helps to create livable, resilient communities by partnering with public agencies, community leaders, and key stakeholders throughout California on place-based climate resilient initiatives while supporting the advancement of the climate change field at large. She focuses on the opportunities that climate change presents to redesign existing systems and processes while collaborating with diverse partners to implement equitable, innovative, and comprehensive climate solutions. Welcome, Julia. Just going to talk about the California funding landscape. Thank you for joining us.
Of course, thanks, Phoenix. And Adam, I caught the last portion of your presentation, so it sounds like I'm following a very fun presentation with a drier topic as the last presentation on a Saturday training. So I will try to make this as fun as I can as far as funding goes, and make it as valuable for folks as possible. I'll try to monitor the chat, so if folks have questions throughout my presentation, please feel free to jump right in. And Phoenix, if you see anything, if I can get your help in lifting anything up, that'd be great. And I know many of you are likely familiar with other tips related to finding funding, looking at grant writing, or other reflections. So encourage folks to engage through the chat function. So all right, let's jump right in. So before digging into specific funding programs, I actually wanted to do a quick overview of kind of what different funding and financing opportunities or other reflections. So encourage folks. All right, so looking at funding sources. So funding refers to money that's provided that does not have to be repaid. There are a number of different types of funding sources, so looking at grants or requests for proposals, typically coming from government agencies or foundations. They often have specified goals or a very specific scope of work that applicants can respond to. There are also sponsorships. Often there are some goals associated, often coming from a variety of different public, private, nonprofit, or academic institutions. Typically, we'll see sponsorships of events or programs that kind of align with the sponsors' their work in the field. And sometimes there are some need to be offered, like providing kind of promotional support, as an example. Donations are another option, right? Donations don't have to be repaid, whether that's through crowdfunding, exploring corporate employee matching programs, bringing in major donors. Donations are another source of funding. And then fees. And you can see the potential source of funding. So overall, thinking about funding, they don't have to be repaid. Sometimes funding sources can be unrestricted. So sometimes, as I noted previously, there are specific goals or scopes of work, but there's also kind of unrestricted funding that can be provided. In terms of the trade-offs and some of the challenges, it of course depends on the amount of funding that is available. It also if an organization is only relying on grants because that can also be quite burdensome. And depending on the nature of the funding program, it can be competitive. There are also a number of financing mechanisms that can be leveraged. So this is looking at money that must be repaid over time. That's essentially the biggest difference between funding and financing. Oftentimes there needs to be a business case or some kind of financial model to demonstrate that the amount of money that's financed can be repaid and that there is viability in the program that's being funded. So loans are probably the most obvious option in terms of financing, oftentimes coming from financial institutions, credit unions, and banks. There are also state agencies that provide loans, or other nonprofits, community foundations that provide loans or run microloan programs. Many nonprofits can also qualify for no interest loan programs. It's just important to have a plan for repayment. You can also look at credit, essentially a pre-approved credit line. again, mostly coming from credit unions and banks. This is a good option as like a flexible gap solution. I think many of us are familiar with how grant programs are structured, where funding isn't provided upfront. It's provided after an invoice is sent, after the expenses are actually accrued. So if there's a cash flow challenge, credit can be used as that kind of flexible gap solution, and kind of working something out with the creditors, especially as a nonprofit, to ensure that you're getting low interest rates. Investments are another option. So looking at opportunities to invest in stocks or bonds. Nonprofits can also get a tax-free return. Endowments are another option that allow for continuous growth, where typically the principal capital isn't actually withdrawn, and it's just a return on the investments that are withdrawn, and a portion of it goes back to reinvest in the endowment. I will say, in terms of investments, it's typically larger nonprofits or kind of more institutional players who have the upfront capital, but I think we've been seeing more community-based organizations kind of teaming up to explore investments as a group, as a way to build capital. And then there are incentives. This is more so looking at reducing costs, right? So if there are rebates and incentives available, these are typically for like physical improvements, so building improvements, like equipment purchases, material purchases. There are also incentives that are available, maybe not for the nonprofit specific directly, but oftentimes for the community members that you serve. That would be another way to kind of work towards your mission by exploring what incentives are available. Generally, rated financing, leveraging multiple sources, is often where we need to turn to get projects funded, or to ensure that a project can be sustainably funded over a longer time period. So what does that mean? It means combining different sources to get what you bring in the dollars that you need to implement your project. So other ways to reduce costs, group purchasing, so partnering up with folks who are looking at similar materials or supplies, just cost sharing even, exploring in-kind donations and pro bono support. I think especially in the Bay Area, there are a lot of companies that are headquartered here or that have a larger presence in this community. I think there are opportunities for kind of donations and pro bono support could be solicited. Many companies provide discounts for nonprofits, whether that's for software or renting space out. And then building capacity to increase efficiency and impact is another area that I think many organizations are focusing on. And then exploring opportunities to engage your board members or other connections that you have to kind of get your foot in the door to engage with major donors or foundations that can sometimes be challenging to access. So with that, I'm going to dig into funding opportunities, and first just starting with what we're facing this year. It's an unprecedented budget surplus of $75 billion. I heard through the grapevine that we might be facing another significant budget surplus next year as well, also in the tune of $75 billion. We've never been in a position like this in the past, so it's been really interesting to follow this process, I will say. Here in front of you is specifically for the climate resilience budget package. There are a few other budget packages for drought, for wildfire resilience, and then a number of other programs that are receiving continuous appropriations. But I did want to touch on the climate resilience package. So you can see here the different programs that are that have funding appropriated, who that department is, and then what the level of funding is across 3 years. So for the climate resilience budget package, almost $3.7 billion that will be invested over over 3 years. But given that this is the 2021 to 2022 fiscal year budget, the committed funds are really this first year. That's kind of what is committed in the budget. And then for years 2 and 3, what we've seen from the legislature is a kind of commitment that they are interested and wanting to invest, the $2 billion and the $1.2 billion in years 2 and 3, once those budget planning processes begin. So we're getting some strong signals, but for years 2 and 3, it's not guaranteed yet until we see that kind of play out in next year's budget. So a few things to call out that I think folks might be interested in. The Community Resilience Center's Extreme Heat and Community Resilience Program. That's a new program. As community leaders, I imagine many of you might be exploring solutions like Community Resilience Center potentially, or kind of looking at resilience more broadly and more holistically, not just focusing on climate, but also thinking about broader community needs. That would be one that I think folks might be interested in. Given that this is the Oakland Shoreline Leadership Academy, there are a number of programs related to coastal resilience that might be of interest. So the Coastal Protection and Adaptation Program, there's an Ocean Protection Trust Fund. These are kind of fun for years 2 and 3. Same thing for the Community Resilience Center is one. So that's kind of an early heads up to keep an eye out for that. And another kind of local collaboratives to ultimately help build the capacity of community-based organizations to be able to compete for state funding more effectively. It also looks at different aspects of community resilience and workforce development, the Climate Adaptation Resilience Planning Grant Program, the Environmental Justice Initiative, and the Regional Climate Resilience Planning and Implementation Program. And then, of course, I imagine many folks might be familiar with the Transformative Climate Communities Program. I think all of these are, of course, focused on climate resilience and might be relevant to the work that you're all doing. And many, if not all of these, have a strong equity focus or a requirement to prioritize what the state defines as disadvantaged communities. With the process for new programs like this, the state agencies that you see here, so the Strategic Growth Council, the California Governor's Office of Planning and Research, the Environmental Protection Agency, will be working to draft a set of program guidelines. Once those, and in drafting those guidelines, these agencies often host a series of stakeholder workshops to get input from folks working on the ground to help inform how the grant guidelines and program guidelines are set up. Once the guidelines are drafted, they'll be kind of published for public review and comments. That's a really great opportunity to engage in that process, in that review process, to ensure that the local needs, the regional needs that you're all aware of, kind of what you're hearing from the community, is reflected in the guidelines, so that there is that those the types of projects that are needed will be eligible for funding. I am generally hearing that for many of these working to staff up. This is a lot of funding coming in, and this funding will have to go out the door this fiscal year. So they'll have to be, all the agencies will have to go through the program guidelines development period, review the applications, and determine who will be awarded by June of next year. So it's a rather tight timeline from like a state perspective. So generally what I've been hearing is many agencies are working to staff up and hire, and then we'll start to develop those guidelines. I think early 2022 is when we can expect to see the guidelines getting finalized and the program application period opening. So from here, I just wanted to talk through a few grant programs that folks might be interested in. So there's the Climate Ready program from the State Coastal Conservancy. This program is looking generally at safeguarding coastal communities by reducing future risks from climate change. So primarily looking at sea level rise as a major threat. It also looks at lifting up nature-based solutions. This program is funded by the State Trade Program, which provides money to the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. So it does also look at reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Overall, they're looking at promoting innovative approaches with the potential of replicating those projects elsewhere. That's a common theme across a lot of state grant programs that I think many have likely seen, that I certainly see quite a bit. Being able to essentially awarding project applications that could be replicated, that could be relevant for other communities, as state agencies with limited funding, folks are going to want to see, like, how can their investment provide more value beyond the community that's being funded. So it's kind of an important aspect to consider. And then more information is available at that link. Right now, they aren't accepting applications, but this is an ongoing program with funding that is continuously appropriated. So this would be a good one to look at. I should also note for the Climate Ready program, nonprofits, tribal governments, and public agencies are eligible recipients. And looking at the urban greening program, I think many might be familiar with this one. This is really focusing on establishing, enhancing, expanding community-facing parks, so looking at things like tree planting, green infrastructure, in transportation infrastructure, and looking at active transportation infrastructure. The eligible recipients here also includes nonprofits. Always great to see when state grant programs have expanded eligibility. And it does require all projects to do at least one of the following: either acquiring, creating, expanding an existing, or creating a new community park or green space, or utilizing natural systems and nature-based solutions to provide multiple benefits. Link for more information here. So I think folks saw in my previous slide, the climate resilience budget package does provide funding for the urban greening program. It's the urban greening and forestry program. So $50 million in this current fiscal year. So stay tuned for the program guidelines for the application period if that's of interest. There's also the Youth Community Access Grant Program. There are a few requirements here. So this is a program that's intended to serve youth, and the definition of youth here is between the ages of birth and 26. It's primarily focusing on increasing youth accessibility to natural cultural resources, and the program guidelines include kind of a greater definition or more detailed definition of what that entails, and also looking at including design features and elements that promote youth health, safety, well-being, and comfort. On top of these requirements, they do have a number of funding priorities as well. So looking at projects that feature youth-led opportunities, that propose resource awareness campaigns, and empower youth to make healthy choices. I thought I saw, Phoenix, in some of the prep emails you shared, that youth engagement, youth leadership development may be of interest to some folks on the cohort. So this might be an interesting one to explore further. Eligible applicants for this grant program does include nonprofit organizations, as well as federally and non-federally recognized California Native American tribes, as well as public agencies. The next funding cycle for this program is expected to start in the spring or summer of next year. So again, I would take a peek at that web link if you're interested, and subscribe to receive updates so you get the latest announcement once they launch. The maximum award for an individual project for this program is $300,000. There's also the Department of Toxic Substances Control's Equitable Community Revitalization Grant Program. So this is a new grant program. This was through Senate Bill 158 that focused on investigating and cleaning up more contaminated properties and revitalizing environmental justice communities. So for this one, there's $200 million available through a competitive process, and it's primarily looking at community-wide assessments, environmental investigations, and then environmental cleanups. And again, and this is kind of building from like the brownfield cleanup program. So it does require eligible sites to meet the definition of a brownfield, and you can kind of see the definition there. Eligible entities include public agencies, nonprofits, and tribes. This is a new program, so $200 million would be for the first round of funding. Currently, it looks like they're working to schedule a series of public engagement sessions to then to essentially inform the application process. They're looking to do an initial launch of the application around late fall of this year. So now would be kind of, around now, maybe over the next month, we might see the application come up, and they're looking to keep that open, keep that application period open for 6 to 8 weeks. So the Prop 58 California Parks and Recreation Per Capita Program, I will flag this. This program is looking at this program is only the only eligible recipients here are cities, counties, and regional park and open space districts. But I wanted to flag this as a program that is not competitively awarded. So all of the programs that I already spoke to, it's a competitive process, right? There's a limited amount of funding. Applications are coming in. I would almost guarantee if every single round the total amount of funding requested by all the applications is more than what's actually available in the fund. So it's a competitive process. For this one, it's actually not competitive. It's based on there's a calculation that's used to essentially determine the funding allocations to different cities and counties just on a per capita basis. So the opportunity here is, I think, for folks who are looking at kind of park rehabilitation, creation, improvements. This could include land acquisition, doing pre-development planning, design, actual development and construction. We're looking at improving or enhancing or creating recreation facilities like community centers. If this is something that you're really interested in, this could be a great opportunity to engage with local jurisdictions, with the cities and counties, park districts, open space districts in your area to explore potential partnerships here, since that funding is becoming available. More locally, I wanted to flag the Measure AA program, the community grants program. So the eligible projects here. So first, one option is a habitat project looking at restoring, protecting, or enhancing tidal wetlands, managed ponds, or other natural habitats on the shoreline. Looking at a flood management project as part of a habitat project, or looking at a public access project that can provide or improve access or recreational amenities that are part of the habitat project. So what's interesting about this program is that it's fully focused on community-based organizations. So that's essentially the only type of organization that's eligible. There are community-based organizations in what the program calls economically disadvantaged communities. Other kind of priorities for this program include supporting community visioning that leads to developing conceptual plans for shoreline habitat projects, looking at implementing smaller shoreline habitat projects that can provide a plethora of community benefits. So for example, like really bolstering community engagement, education, workforce development, leadership development, and even community celebration as a way to increase social cohesion. Looking at training community leaders to develop proposal and apply for funds, so focusing on that capacity building, and then empowering communities to have a voice in the design and implementation of larger shoreline restoration projects. This has a maximum award of $100,000, and applications are actually accepted and reviewed on a rolling basis. So if you visit this website, you'll see the application already posted. You're able to submit that on a rolling basis. I wanted to also run through, so I should note, these are just a sampling of funding programs that are available, that we're expecting to come online pretty soon within the next few months, if they're not already open. I would recommend exploring other kind of regional agencies like the Bay Area Air District, the Association of Bay Area Governments, kind of other regional government agencies, as they often have their own funding programs and grant programs for community-based organizations and nonprofits in the region. I would also explore other California climate investment programs that are funded through the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. If you're looking at other aspects of transportation or energy and air quality, in addition to kind of shoreline projects. There are a number of other grant programs that I did not cover today. This also doesn't go into what's available through the cities and counties and community foundations. So another space to explore. We don't have a ton of time. I just want to save at least some time for questions. So I'm going to briefly run through some tips for collaborative grant writing. We all know when a funding program, when the application launches, we often don't have a lot of time or capacity to apply. Sometimes the time period is 3 weeks. Sometimes it's longer, but we just don't have the capacity to actually engage in that process. So just wanted to run through some tips for how collaboration can really help in this process. So first, thinking about why do we want to collaborate? So first, looking at eligibility requirements and competitiveness, there might be some restrictions in terms of eligibility, similar to what I shared with the program. To partner with an eligible entity, also looking at what the other minimum qualifications are for that grant program, and working with and bringing others in to form a team, meet all of the qualifications and be competitive. First, like I just mentioned, capacity constraints can make it challenging. So collaborating on an application can really help to support the limited capacity. So in thinking about, how much time there is to respond, what the deadline for the application is, and how built out the requirements are of the application. Some applications can be really short, but oftentimes rather long, and they require a lot of work. Budgeting, figuring out the scope of work, responding to 10+ narrative questions, and pulling a lot of data in. So really splitting that work can make it possible to pull that application together. You can also think about capacity constraints from a project execution standpoint. So we need time to apply for the grant, but if it's awarded, we also need time to actually implement the project. So if we think about any constraints in terms of staff capacity, like are there enough staff available, and do the available staff have the skills needed to implement the work? So I think there is an opportunity to collaborate with other organizations, team up. You you increase your capacity, you increase your capabilities, and there's more flexibility to kind of tap into a larger team, especially for larger projects. Also looking at opportunities to leverage different skills and strengths, both in terms of developing the application or proposal and executing the project. So, for example, maybe like design and like graphic design isn't a strength that your staff have. But maybe there are partners who have that skill and can help to really polish that proposal together. Or maybe there's one of your partners is an absolute wizard on Excel and can really help to pull a budget together. So different ways in which different skills and strengths can be leveraged. And then lastly, relationship building and partnership development. I firmly believe that relationships are absolutely everything and so central to our work. And I think we often spend our time kind of building those relationships, building those partnerships, but it's often unfunded, right? We don't have a separate pot of funding to actually pay for our time to develop these relationships and partnerships. So I have seen that partnering with another organization in the grant writing process, and then once if that's awarded, actually working together on a funded project is an incredible opportunity to really deepen that relationship, and also to form new partnerships. So I've in my role at the Local Government Commission, I've helped to facilitate a number of different coalition programs. So I've kind of facilitated collaborative grant writing quite a few times, and these are kind of the steps that I think about as we get going. So first, visioning. What do you want to accomplish, and how flexible is your vision? Do you need to adjust your vision based on the funding opportunity? So that first question, and thinking about what your vision is and how flexible you are to adapting your vision, I think is important to think about so that you're avoiding scope creep. It can also look very different depending on where your starting point is. So your starting point could be you have an existing vision, and then you're looking for funding opportunities that can match that vision. The reverse is finding a funding opportunity and molding your vision to meet the requirements of that funding opportunity, and kind of just thinking about, like, you know, how flexible are you willing to be with your vision. That can really help you kind of set some boundaries in terms of how you're engaging with other partners. In terms of teaming, thinking about, you know, who are your existing partners that share your vision, and then who else needs to be brought in. So, you know, of course, having relationships can really expedite that teaming process. When that trust is there, when, you know, that relationship already exists, you know who to contact, they're going to be responsive, and, you know, you can kind of move things forward more quickly compared to reaching out to an organization for the first time where that trust isn't there because that experience isn't there. That can make it a little more challenging. It can make that process take a little longer. So, you know, you're kind of working to build that trust as you're figuring out what your partnership could look like. You can also think about, you know, who else could be brought in to strengthen your proposal, to make your proposal more competitive, and to kind of support your ultimate vision and outcomes you're hoping to achieve. Scoping, who is in the best position to do what, and, you know, what roles will partners have to balance collaboration with efficiency. I've heard this as a challenge from some of our other communities, organizations that we partnered with and that we work with in some of our capacity building programs, is that the budgeting conversation can often be quite tricky, especially if there's, you know, like a larger, like, institutional nonprofit that's leading the process that's brought in community-based organizations. And how do you navigate that conversation when it comes down to the budget and who should be getting what? I often approach this from a scoping process, the scope of work and the organization's capacity, ultimately guiding the budgeting process. So just figuring out, like, what the main tasks are, who's in the best position to do what, and then, you know, allowing that to shape the budget, I think, like, that's kind of the process that I typically follow that seems to work well. Another consideration is, you know, collaboration takes time. So thinking about, you know, what tasks does it make sense to be completed more collaboratively versus others that could be done more independently. Kind of make it more efficient to do certain tasks, kind of open up resources to collaborate in a deeper level on other tasks. So kind of thinking about what that balance is, I found that to be helpful as well. And then finally, in thinking about coordinating the actual grant writing process, you know, who has the capacity and experience to lead those coordination efforts, and how are you going to be coordinating? Sure that you pull everything together and it gets submitted on time. So looking at collaborative spaces for co-development like Google Docs and assigning roles and deadlines could be really helpful. I often, when I'm in that lead coordinator role, I always ask for all of the required materials very early on. So when we need resumes or different attachments, I make sure we get those requests out as soon as I can. And then I always reserve at least one full day, if not two, to fully package the final proposal, especially if you're going through the development process in a collaborative way. You definitely need time to pull everything together and do a full read through to make sure things are kind of lining up and everything makes sense. And then super quickly, I'll run through some tips and tricks to collaborative grant management. So this is kind of once the grant application is submitted, it's awarded. Now, how do you continue to collaborate with your team, with your partners in an effective way? So first, I always have some kind of ground setting exercise. This can look like one or oftentimes like multiple meetings with like surveys or polls. So really stepping back from the application writing process, which, you know, like the ways that we frame things in an application can be fluffy in some ways. It can be very ambitious. It doesn't, and sometimes there's some translation that's needed from like the ultimate outcomes of reducing greenhouse gas emissions and restoring shoreline projects to, what are some other markers of success? What are the team's shared values? There's also a great time to go through like definitions and terms to make sure we're using the same language and to avoid miscommunication and misunderstandings in the future. And then thinking through the structure, how is the team going to make decisions? Is everything going to be by consensus, or over time, are there items that will need to, and what are the roles and responsibilities of each partner in terms of project management? So, there will be a dedicated project manager, but oftentimes for effective coordination and management, everyone needs to be. And as you get going, thinking about how are you going to be collaborating, what are the systems that will be created, and how do those systems work with existing workflows? I think that's a really important aspect. So let's have an example. So let's say the project manager for this one project really wants to use Slack as a communication tool. They already use Slack for their other projects. They're really wanting to continue using Slack or use Slack as a communication platform for this new project. But if nobody else on the team uses Slack, they're not familiar with Slack, they actually prefer emails, that should be factored in, right? Like if you kind of setting up a system that other folks, aren't able to navigate as easily, or it's just something that's going to be much more difficult to bring into their regular workflow, I think can present challenges down the road. So oftentimes kind of the iterative process to think through, like, what are the potential systems and tools? What are folks already using? What are folks comfortable with? And then how can we meet in the middle? Then lastly, revisiting, just thinking about how are you going to continue getting input and feedback on those processes and systems that are set up, and how frequently do you want to look at implementing improvements? Trying to implement programmatic improvements on a daily basis, weekly basis, monthly basis can be really challenging, but maybe quarterly, or if it's a longer time horizon, biannually or annually, so there's a way to bring input and feedback into the program design to kind of look at ways to improve it to get to the outcomes that you're looking for. So those are some of my tips. I do have some templates that I'm happy to share and I'm happy to walk through, but yeah, first just wanted to at least thank everybody and see if there are any questions that folks have, or if anyone else is aware of other grant programs that I missed. I know I missed a lot. Would love to hear from you too.
Hello, Julia?
I'm not hearing any questions. I don't know if you have anything you need to go over as part of closing. I want to make sure there's enough time for
yes,
to wrap up.
Julia, can you hear me?
Oops.
Can you?
Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry. I just realized my headset was never connected to my phone. Hopefully folks were able to hear me. I'm so sorry about that.
Yes, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you.
Oh, would you mind going back to the last slide before this?
Of course.
Yeah, this slide. Thank you so much.
Of course. And I'm happy to run through these really quickly if that would be helpful. I'm going to see next if we have time to do that.
We have 10 minutes left, so.
All right. Let me get these open and I'll just walk through some of these templates. So this is essentially one of my planning documents that I turn into a template. So as I noted previously, I often find myself in the position of coordinating collaborative grant applications. So I often will create just a planning document that's shared with the full team. I'll include some key information about the grant program, the funding opportunity, and kind of some information about like the proposal development process. I often create like a Google folder with all the different documents in there. And then depending on how large the team is, I sometimes set up an email listserv as well, just so nobody gets missed. From there, I collect some key information. I ask folks to include key contact info and then what their hourly rate is. And this is just to get some key info that we'll need for the budget and later processes. And here's the timeline. This is built as like a 3-week timeline. If there's more time, that's always better, but sometimes I find that there have been at least half a dozen opportunities where we only had 3 weeks to apply. So I tried to build out this timeline and, as aggressively as I could. So it really looks at, forming the project team, starting to define project roles, collecting some key information, drafting different elements of the proposal, and then finalizing. And you can see there are 3 calls that are suggested at a minimum. So that's also reflected here in the call notes section. There are some template kind of suggested agendas for each of the calls. So this first call is really that kind of initial call where you can kind of get on the same page at the highest level. Like what do we want to achieve with our proposal? Kind of going through what the teaming status is. Are there any gaps? Are there others we need to bring in? What does the process look like for coordinating to build out the proposal or application and then get it ready for submission? The second call dives a little deeper. So it's kind of going into the status of each of the sections of the proposal, digging deeper into the work plan and budget. And then the third call is really focused on kind of finalizing what's missing, what's missing in terms of attachments, what needs to get signed, kind of doing a full review of some of the key narrative sections, and then finalizing the budget. One part that I skipped is the project role. I found myself using this process quite a bit more recently, where we kind of have we first create an outline of like the task, subtasks, and deliverables, and then each of the partners can go in and indicate what role are they interested in having. Do they want to lead that subtask? Do they want to support, participate as kind of like kind of the lowest, like kind of most minimal role that one can have, just kind of being involved but not necessarily supporting the completion of the deliverable, and then or no role. So what I typically do is have folks go in. It doesn't matter what else you see that others put in. Like, think about it from your own organization's perspective. What are you interested in leading, supporting, participating in, or maybe you don't want to have a role? And then I'll go through and see kind of where the gaps are, where we have like duplicate leads, and kind of work with partners to kind of right size the various roles for the project task. So I find this process to be pretty helpful. And then I often will assign the lead entity to build out the kind of narrative for the task or subtask that they signed up for. So this is one sample, and Phoenix, I'm happy to kind of package this all up for y'all. This is kind of a template for a narrative section. So typically what we'll see is like the project approach, qualifications, the scope of work, the project management plan. Like those are often like the main sections that we'll see required in an application. So as the coordinator for kind of this overall effort, I'll create a document for each of those sections. So if this is for qualifications, this would just say qualification section. I'll replace that to say qualifications. I'll pull in some guidance directly from the grant guidelines or the RFP guidelines, just so folks don't have to go back and forth so much, and they kind of have everything in one place as they build out the language. What I'll also do is try to do some earlier thinking to help with the structure of that section. So let's say this is focused on qualifications. I'm going to add the guidance in here and kind of think through, like, okay, if these are all the things that we need to provide, how can I help the person drafting this qualification section to kind of think through it in an organized way? So it might be that the first section is focusing on like narrative responses to minimum qualifications. Maybe the second section is organizational profiles of partners. Maybe that third section is focused on like staff bios, project roles, and resumes, for example. Just to kind of do some early planning and thinking to help with the structure can definitely be a time saver down the road when you're looking to pull everything together. I'm just going to undo this so it remains a template. And then finally, here is a template, work plan, and budget. Let me just expand this a little bit. That just might show up really small on your screen. So here's where you can fill this out with, what the task name is, what the subtask name is. I often find that having the deliverable listed right next to it is a really helpful way to estimate out hours. And then you can see, this is currently set up to have 5 different organizations with up to 5 staff members in each of those. And this is a space where anything highlighted just has instructions in there. So this is where, you would replace with the staff name, add their hourly rate, and then you would add their hours. So let's just say this will be me. Let's say my hourly rate is $100. This template is set up so that as I go through and estimate out hours, everything will automatically update, like the totals for the hours, the total for the task, the org total, and then it also totals up to on the right over here. Hopefully this is a helpful time-saving template. And then here's where you can also estimate out direct expenses, and everything kind of totals up here. There's also a template work schedule. Depending on how detailed it needs to be, this can be used as a Gantt chart where you're just kind of filling in, the colors for each of the subtasks. Some applications will require a timeline for each deliverable, but oftentimes it's for the subtask. So if that's the case, you can either just delete or hide these other rows, and that'll help to tighten up your timeline. So hopefully that's helpful, and I'll be sure to share these templates and my presentation with Phoenix as part of follow-up. I will stop there and turn it back over to you, Phoenix.
Yeah, those are awesome. I definitely want to use that. That's a very organized way to get through a grant process. Is there anyone else who has any questions for it? I think this was a really great presentation. Thank you so much. It was exactly what we had hoped for. And I think there's a lot of grant opportunities that you put forward and explained that really match some of the projects that folks are hoping to do. So it's kind of opened my eyes, at least, to like some of the potential that we're in there for. Just opening up for any more questions. Okay. So thank you so much, Julia, for joining us. And